Shift Happens Podcast.
Welcome to the Shift Happens Podcast, where we explore the latest trends and technologies transforming the future of work. In this episode, we sit down with Angela Heise, Corporate Vice President for Worldwide Public Sector at Microsoft. Angie recently returned from an extensive trip meeting with public sector customers and partners across Asia and Australia. She'll share insights from those conversations around how governments are approaching topics like ethical AI, risk management, cloud adoption, and change management. Let's dive in.
Shift Happens Podcast. Shift Happens Podcast.
Well, Angie, thanks again for being available and joining Mari and myself in this podcast. And, you've done a lot of work in the public sector. You've done a lot of work with different governments around the world. So maybe let's start with your recent trip out of Asia. I know in our last call, we were talking about just the excitement and the transformation that's going on. And so maybe you can talk about that trip and what you observed around customers and even partners in this new wave of transformation we're going through.
Yeah, perfect. So I had the opportunity to spend almost 2.5 weeks visiting customers in Asia, Australia, and then actually for a day in Redmond. And so between Japan and Singapore and Australia, and then I ended up meeting a customer from India in Redmond, I covered almost 30 different customer meetings, and I had a whole variety of partner meetings as part of that, which made for really, I'll say, interesting, condensed time period to identify patterns and trends, right? So a few of the items. One, every single customer I talked to either has been using AI for years in some sense, or they have proof of concepts that they're working on, and they are definitely exploring dozens of additional use cases of how it can transform their agency, organization, their citizens' lives or students' lives, depending on the different organizations. Really looking forward, and at the same time trying to say, how do we leverage this fantastic technology that can solve a lot of both organizational and societal problems, potentially, but do so by changing how our talent works, the cultures within our organizations, how people engage with our agencies, and doing that change management aspects in a way that helps bring everybody along as well as is inclusive.
That's amazing, Angie. First of all, I really understand what you're saying. When you have the opportunity to spend so much time with a group of customers, you start to get a sense of what's really impacting them. One of the recent discussions we've been having with our sort of outreach to customers has been around risk management and the governance around the design, use, and deployment of AI capabilities. So I'm just curious, in your discussions, how is that topic, sort of being approached?
Yeah, I think so. You can't have a conversation with AI about the technology without the ethical use, the risk, the level of transparency that's needed and required based on their different constituents. We have had customers that have had, I'll say, their own challenges with how they've implemented AI in the past. And so they bring those lessons learned and want to make sure that they are building trust within their organization, that they're building trust with their citizens, and trying to find that, I'll say, that right balance of disclosure and transparency without bombarding people with too much information, right? That then it gets lost in the details. And so what I find fascinating is every customer I talk to has some framework, or I'll say set of principles, right, that their organization either has adopted or is in the process of adopting. They are at some level of maturity of operationalizing within their organization, right? So it's one thing to have a framework and this set of principles, but how do you make sure it gets ingrained with every implementation you do, right? Every product you produce, every service you provide, the normal rhythms of the business, to make sure it's not an adjunct, right? Or an afterthought. And so making sure that they operationalize it. And then also, I'll say, educating not only their own internal teams of what that looks like and how they need to think about it, but also in many cases their citizens, or it may be other agencies or other nations, right, that they're interacting with, to say these are our guardrails. This is what we need to know in advance, right? And to make sure there's a level of transparency on expectations. And so it's fascinating to me, because when you do meet with so many customers in such a condensed amount of time, you get very clear pictures on the different levels of maturity, all the, I'll say, really common challenges that everyone's facing. And I will say, I'm a bit of an optimist anyways, but a real sense of hope that there are so many fantastic minds that are attacking these challenges from slightly different aspects, that if we can really pull together the best practices and some of the great successes, as well as share some of those fantastic lessons learned across the public sector, we could get there so much faster.
So Angie, you mentioned something about, this sense of hope, this sense of opportunity. But throughout the evolution of technology, I would say in the past, 20, 25 years, there's these distinct junctures, right? Where first when the PC came out, and then mobile devices, and then the internet. So would you say in this new age of AI, is this a massive evolution of how things are going to change, or is it just one of those, it's like the phones, like the internet? And if so, what's a drastic impact? Have customers start thinking about this, or government organizations start thinking about, wow, this is really a game changer that in the end will make everybody's lives better?
Yeah. So I'll maybe steal the title of your podcast. It's a major shift. Like it truly is in how technology can be used, should be used, and can tackle some of the problems. And maybe I'll share a couple of examples that I think are really telling. Several of the organizations are dealing with the demographic differences within their organization of public sector employees that, I'll say, have unbelievable subject matter expertise, right, in how the government works, how the different agencies work, and how they interoperate, how they tackle challenges. And at the same time, they are trying to attract new public servants to be able to come in. And so is there a way that they can use that knowledge transfer, right? Use AI to help be able to capture all that rich knowledge and understanding, and to be able to onboard and train up the new talent a lot faster. And then I'll also say at the same time, they have these societal challenges on aging populations and demographics, and trying to find a different way to be able to interact with them. And so generative AI creates an opportunity for maybe if a particular demographic or generation isn't comfortable with using their phone or the internet or something, right, to be able to file a permit, right, to be able to get some government assistance. Can they use a voice, right, generative AI voice translation service to be able to interact, to be able to get the information that they need, to be able to access the services? I'll say there's a lot of work being done in those areas that are hopeful that they'll be able to actually run governments maybe with a smaller workforce. They don't necessarily have the number of people to be able to bring on board, as well as to be able to help their society be able to get access to information much faster than maybe what they could in the past, and to be able to serve them in a much better way.
That's amazing. One thing that I always curious about, especially when you get the opportunity to talk to customers across different regions or different countries, is do you see a similarity in the way they're approaching data governance, especially as you mentioned, if the dependency is going to be, we have a rich set of information assets that's going to help us advance skills or transform a workforce. I'm curious as to what types of regulations did you hear from any of your customers or partners as you were traveling across these different countries?
Yeah, so I think there's a common understanding, and I have to say, like, this year AI has been that bit of a lighthouse to say, oh, there's a real tangible capability that we need to be able to help solve some of our biggest challenges that is very clear now, right? And while for many of us, we thought it was clear before, and the need to manage all your data, to be able to have it accessible, to be able to maybe secure it in the cloud. But this gives you like a real strong capability that is necessary. It's necessary for the evolution of the agency, for the organization, for your teams, to be able to attract talent. And I'll have to say, this is across all of the customers that I've talked to, whether it be military or educators, um, is that they need to adopt cloud as much as possible. And at the same time, they need to be very sensitive and understanding at looking at their policies and regulations to make sure they're doing so in a way that's secure and allows them to meet their data requirements, their data policies, I'll say most sensitive sets of data. And by that, I mean like citizen information, right? Things that they are absolutely, they want to make sure is protected in the best possible manner. But they also recognize that some of the policies and regulations that have been created didn't have the latest technologies in mind, right? They were created a long time ago. And it's very common knowledge now that on-premise technologies is not secure. That's not really where you want to make sure you're putting your most critical assets. So there's a recognition of they have all this digital debt. They have these legacy systems. They probably need some sort of hybrid environment, but they really have to try to adopt cloud as much as possible, and a sense of looking at their overall data estate as well as their regulations and policies to see what do they need to shift. How can they make sure they're taking full advantage of the technology that's in front of them?
It's very true. We've seen, and maybe, as I was listening to your perspective, AI could be a pull-through effect. There's been so many organizations that have had still hesitation, despite the amount of investment that's gone into cloud infrastructure to add that security layer. So hopefully this AI-driven purpose will help a lot of organizations realize that maybe a hybrid state is preferred as opposed to, as you said, an on-premise state. I'm curious as to, do you see a difference in the way defense versus public or citizen type agencies or civilian agencies are addressing the governance of data? Is there a difference?
There's a difference in, I'll say, all the different levels of data classification and maybe that they need to take into consideration, depending on which agency it is. Okay, so there's obviously a lot of like Home Office and Homeland Security agencies that kind of have similar challenges that the military have. But I think for us, a lot of the military, and we've shared over and over again, a lot of the lessons learned we've had in Ukraine. And I don't know if your listeners and you have heard that, but like for Ukraine, they had a no cloud policy up until a couple weeks before the war started. And that shifted significantly. And there was a couple of key lessons learned. There was a sentiment that they could actually hide in the cloud, that their data and their most critical assets for their nation actually was more secure there than in their physical data centers. And so I will tell you that we share those lessons learned with our military and defense and intel customers broadly. And they're all looking at how they can leverage this technology in a way that helps give them better decision-making capability, right? And whether it's I'll say if it's an agency for increasing tourism versus an agency that is trying to defend their nation, they're all looking for that. They're looking for how do they have better decision-making, slightly different, actually a lot of different, right? Questions, but it's all about that advantage from a capability perspective. I think there's a level of complexity. There's also some requirements that militaries have that is very much recognized, right? Interoperability, and it's not just within one agency or across agencies within the same nation. They need to be able to interoperate across nations. And that then is, I'll say, that additional collaboration and data information sharing is causing them to look at the problem set a little bit differently. And I think it's something that both military organizations as well as the other civilian agencies are trying to share information back and forth about how they look at those problem sets. Because the more that we can collaborate with public sector agencies, I think the stronger those nations will be, and those organizations, whether it's to be to defend their citizens or if it's to provide some sort of critical citizen service.
With these technologies and certainly the capabilities that it offers for government worldwide, regardless of the type of agencies they are, how does Microsoft think about the future in terms of supporting a lot of these government agencies? Is it through more technologies, enablement and training? Because there's so much coming out, right? So oftentimes when we talk with customers, like, how do we get started? How do we ready ourselves?
Yeah, so I think number one, right, is making sure you're managing your data. And whether it's a multi-cloud environment, if it's a mix of on-premise and cloud, making sure that you have clear visibility so that you can use all that data to make better decisions, right? To be able to provide better services. And so that's first step. That's a fundamental building block. To your point, another fundamental building block is that skilling and being able to ensure that your existing organization, as well as the talent that you want to attract, is going to be able to really flourish and bring the best of themselves when they are a part of your team. And so really being able to empower that team to be able to deliver and use the latest and greatest technologies to be able to do that. And then I'll say the third thing that I spend a lot of time talking to customers about is it is changing so fast. And so the more that we can communicate, here's what we're seeing, here's how it's affecting, right, the products that we provide, how we're engaging with different partners, whether it's different industries, because one of the great things about public sector is we can leverage so much of what commercial industries, right, whether it's retail and their supply chains, or if it is manufacturing and their digital engineering, right? How can we leverage those lessons learned and those examples and use cases across public sector to really elevate and accelerate our own transformation? And so those are really where we are, I'll say, very vividly focused in making sure that our customers are as successful as possible as they're going through these transformations, and also being honest that anybody that's been in this field for certainly as long as I have knows that there's going to be hiccups and challenges along the way. And how can we be that true strategic partner and to be able to help along that way?
We hear so much talk around the fear that AI may, and in fact, take some jobs. But Dux and I have had the opportunity to have several guest speakers on the podcast, and the general consensus seems to be that it's really about incorporating AI to advance skills and learning. And I'm curious, as you're out there, do you still see that there's a concern amongst leaders in organizations for attracting talent or even frontline workers, how they consider AI affecting their jobs?
We produce a work trends report, and this last report, I think we just released a couple months ago, was all about AI and had some really fascinating stats to that point in there. I think it was 83% of leaders, right, see this as a big differentiator as far as their own employees and how they can use it. I think it's about 64% of people feel that they are like overtasked with mundane things that they need to do and would welcome some sort of help and support. And I'll tell you the example that I just recently used actually in a keynote in Singapore is, and this is just in my personal life. I have a 14-year-old son, and I can't possibly keep up with all the emails I get from the school on where the activities are, what times practices are. They change every single day. And so if I could actually have some sort of digital assistant just to be able to tell me what I need to make sure is going on in our personal life, man, that would save me hours. And it's not value add, right? It's a task I have to do so that he doesn't show up at the wrong place or doesn't end up getting picked up when he needs to. But in our work lives, in our personal lives, we have dozens of this, right? Of these tasks and this digital debt that is becoming more and more of kind of life administration. And so the more that we can create these digital co-pilots, these assistants to be able to help eliminate some of that work and allow us to do things like this, right? To be able to talk to you guys, to be able to talk to the customers that I spoke with this morning, to be able to talk to my team members, to really spend time doing what I prefer to do, right? What I love, and is certainly more valuable than cleaning out my inbox.
And it also requires a change in how we do things and how we think about things. And right or wrong, the perception of the government is they don't like change. So has this excitement of AI encouraged people to change or are open to change? Because I work a lot with government agencies here in DC. I'm not going to name names, but every time we work on new technology deployments, they're like, if it ain't broken, don't fix it.
Yeah, so it's funny that you say that. I was just talking to a customer this morning, and he was talking about like when the internet first started, and government agencies didn't know exactly what to do with like what kind of websites do they need to create. So they created websites about their agency, what their team, like what they do, right? And now pretty common, right? Whether it's local, regional, or central, as citizens, you interact with those websites pretty frequently, right? Now, we'd love for them to interoperate a little bit better, right? There's a lot of potential opportunities for us going forward, but they've come a long way. So I always find it fascinating because I think there is maybe a little bit of a natural and just a human, right, resistance to change at times. And governments are very intentional and deliberate when they do make changes. What I see is a real embrace of AI. So there's a city in Canada that they do new housing permitting for families in need, and they just recently put a chatbot, an AI capability in place to be able to essentially streamline that process. So, and they took a process that was previously a few months, and they have actually streamlined it to like 2 days, which means, and I want to say the number of families that now get housed because of that earlier is between 5 and 10,000. And so you talk about like a real people impact, right? That's huge. That's significant. And so imagine the economic impacts and benefits, right? If you're able to streamline businesses being able to actually provide services, it really is significant. And for me, like every single customer conversation, they are experimenting and figuring out how to best use these technologies. And they're coming at it from a lens of a citizen-centric view, which is also, I'll say, very, very exciting. And I think part of it, to your point, right, and to my reference about like the web pages in the old days, is from that learning, right, from those lessons of, okay, maybe we need to approach this technology a slightly different view. And by the way, that also allows them to save taxpayer dollars, right? Right? It frees up budget so they can do more innovations. And so for me, it's super, super exciting, inspiring, and really it's moving so fast. I can't wait to see how we're able to leverage these across the globe.
Especially in our personal life, we're so used to now this experience. Like if we order something, we can track the package, but at the same time, if we report something or file a permit with our local agency, we don't know. It just goes to the ether. But with these technologies, it's changing that.
It is inspiring to hear that. I love that citizen-centric view. It also probably is going to promote a lot more compliance as well, right? Which has been the challenge with a lot of the local agencies, because things take so long that people find shortcuts, and that's not ultimately the most effective way. That's really exciting, though, to hear that. It's also interesting, as you were mentioning that, Angie, I can't help but think of how perhaps we're shifting away from when you call into whether you're trying to get product support or you're trying to get, some kind of assistance, and you're kind of going through this very, regimented, fragmented way of engaging with a automated bot, and that hasn't worked very well. In many cases, you're just desperate to speak to someone. You want to engage with someone. So generative AI could certainly provide that sort of personalization and therefore, once again, improve the quality of service that people are getting.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've been on a call, right? And I just want to press zero because I nope.
Agent,
Right.
agent.
When I have something
Right
more
away, you're like
complicated,
zero.
not going to be on your menu.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really, really enlightening, and we can go on and on. But before we wrap up, what advice would you offer to a lot of our listeners, especially in the public sector agency, as all these things are coming? What are the key steps for them to make shift happen in their organization? Any practical guidance or any tips and tricks that you can offer with all the customers you've talked to around the world?
One of the things that I have worked with agencies that do a lot of citizen interaction and engagement, whether it's at the city level or even at central level, to really utilize focus groups to be able to access how their citizens think and interact. And there's a lot of lessons learned to be gleaned there, right? And to approach it from their perspective and view to how to simplify their life and to be able to drive that service that's really going to make a difference. In fact, one of the customers I talked about recently is really trying to drive towards their citizens are more about life events, right? So when something drastic happens in their life, they have all these things they need to do. So how can they simplify that process, right? If you're in the public sector and you can get access to information, and maybe you can't do a focus group of your own citizens, but you can pull other agencies around the globe and how they attack a problem, how they have, what they've tried, what they've failed at, right? And what I have found is one of the reasons I love public sector is that agencies that provide the same service, no matter what nation, love to be able to share, right? They love to be able to connect. They love to be able to understand that other people are having the exact same problems or challenges that they have, and to be able to learn from each other. And so I highly recommend both of those if you can do it. And I do believe that this is a game changer, is that there are so many private companies that really want to partner with public sector organizations to be able to help, whether it be to ensure that they are aware of the resources that they have available to them, to be able to better understand their problem sets. And I think that collaboration will only drive a better understanding of not only the technology, but the talent and skills that's needed, as well as the challenges that our public sector customers face. One of the things that we try to share on a regular basis with our public sector customers is, as a company, we went through and are going through still this massive cultural change. And so while you don't necessarily think of that as Microsoft, when now we're all talking about AI, we should be talking about that. That cultural change has had a huge shift in the way we not only produce products, but how we interact with each other internally, as well as with our customers. And so if we can share those aspects of our experiences, I think it can only strengthen our partnership and hopefully only strengthen our societies as a whole.
That's well said. Well said. Definitely subscribe to that. Probably a good place to end. We thank you so much for your time, Angie. It's been a pleasure. Learned so much just in a few minutes. I'm sure Dux and I could probably go on for a while with you, but we're sensitive to your time and would love to, have you again in the near future to see how progress is going in your world.
Yeah, I would love to be on again, and I really appreciate this. Is like I said, it's been one of the highlights of my day for sure.
Thank you, Angie.
Excellent. Thank you.
Shift Happens Podcast.
Thanks for listening. The key takeaway today was that the public sector stands on the cusp of tremendous change driven by AI. Like any technology disruption, risk exists, but the potential benefits are vast. Done right, AI can usher in a new era of empowering, personalized, and human-centric public services for all. If you like today's episode, subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcast. See you next time.
Shift Happens Podcast. Shift Happens Podcast.